All right, very honored to have our next speaker. Don Sexton, who's Professor of Marketing and Faculty Director, Center for International Business Education and Research at Columbia University. Had the chance to sit down with Don a few months ago, have a great chat. And what Don's going to help us do now is we're talking about kind of the big picture from a technology standpoint, and Don is going to help us think about the client perspective from an ROI standpoint on where we're going. So, Don, please. Right.
Good to see you again. Thanks. Good morning, all. I had a pleasure of meeting some of you last evening. It's great to meet you all this morning. Len has given me an impossible task for a professor, 15 minutes. You might remember that for a professor, a soundbite is 3 hours. Still, I'm going to try to do in 15 minutes what we can cover here in terms of a study. This study, by the way, was done earlier this year, and I have to especially give credit to our sponsors. Research Now did the data collection and data processing, but the study would never have occurred, frankly, without the muscle of Green Book. But Lukasz and Len spent a lot of time making this study happen. And in fact, a lot of people were involved in the study, and I'm just fortunate enough to have the chance to tell you what we found. The study involved over 250 marketing decision makers. They were all screened for being in marketing. Companies ranged in size, but we had many that were over $1 billion in revenues. Diverse industries, about 90% were U.S. companies. So again, it is skewed toward the U.S., and we're trying now, I should say, to see if there are any systematic differences between U.S. and Europe, which is where we had the second largest sample, but you can guess that we don't have a lot to work with there, but we're trying. There are three major storylines that I'm going to take you through. One is big data. In other words, how are companies coping with big data? A second, which would be of interest especially to everyone in this room, social media, especially concerning research on the impact of social media. And then finally, ROI. How does this all relate to trying to understand what you're really getting financially in terms of using any kind of a media, but especially social media? To begin, we find that good news, 91% believe that successful brands do need the customer data. Kind of makes you wonder what the other 9% are doing, though, doesn't it? But this is across all industries, and essentially the worst case we had was 80%. By the way, one of the reasons it takes professors 3 hours to say good morning is we have to give people time to take notes. But good news for you, we're going to give you access to this study afterwards, so you don't have to write down all my little numbers here, and I'll be giving you other numbers that are not on the slides as well. But you'll get the whole report later, or access to the whole report, so you can just think about this as we go through it. Problems with data. We found very few people who felt, yeah, we have the right amount of data. 39% said they're collected too infrequently. Another 29% said we have too little data, believe it or not. 36% said we have too much data, we don't know what to do with it. As I said, very few thought they had just the right amount. When it came to social media data, the numbers were lower. Essentially, only about 35% felt they had appropriate data. Were collecting data, and for mobile, it was only 19% felt they were collecting appropriate data. Keep in mind, again, that this was a large study. I've been involved in several surveys like this. This is one of the larger studies. Probably since we've done it, there are more studies coming out, but at the time, it was one of the most up-to-date studies. In terms of challenges, however, it wasn't just the amount of data and when they got it. One of the major problems, and Rolf actually alluded to this, was in fact that many thought that there was no sharing of data across divisions, functions, and so on. Personally, I've seen this happen in a lot of banks, for example, where there's no sharing of data among the auto loan people, the mortgage loan people, the credit card people, the savings account people, and so forth. And so therefore, even though they have a lot of data, they're not connected, they're siloed. We're going to see this theme come up a little bit later. Interestingly enough, CMOs didn't think this was as much of a problem as people below VP level in the trenches. Over half of the people below VP level felt this was a real, serious problem dealing with other parts of my company, trying to get data from them that in fact I can use to put together with my data, again tying together with some of the things Rolf said, trying to make an overall view. In other words, we have data but we're not using it the way we might. In terms of digital, let's take a look at digital. Widespread adoption, you all know that. IAB estimates over about $32 billion in digital ad revenue last year, growing at the rate of 20%, and you all know mobile ad revenue is growing at the rate of about 150% a year. That's not in our study, but that's from the IAB. 85% we found are using, on the average, own brand accounts on social networks, for example. Lowest industry was 70%, and this was across everything. 78% for B2B. B2B, heavy users, again, of social media. To me, that was somewhat surprising, but perhaps it shouldn't be given the rate of adoption. Of companies, however, using those tools, very few of them were able or felt they were able to tie their efforts on any kind of digital media to financial impact. In particular, for social network marketing, Facebook, et cetera, only 14% could do it. Mobile advertising, 17%, only 17% felt they had control over their expenditures on mobile media, given wanting to know the financial impact. In contrast, direct mail marketing, it was over 40%, about 47%. So again, not surprising, I don't think. New media, still learning curve, but again, that's what we found. In terms of, again, trying to link databases, again, the same question in a way, coming from a different angle. CMOs, 70% of them felt having a cross-platform model, in other words, being able to compare the ways they communicate with their customers, was a major problem, a major goal for them to achieve. The reason for this, by the way, and again, everyone in this room would certainly know this very, very well, is that many of these media were being measured with different kinds of metrics. The older media, the more traditional media, the television media, the print media, and so on, they were being measured essentially by what we call general metrics, engagement metrics like attitude, awareness, things of that sort. Whereas the digital media, by and large, were being measured, I'll show you a slide of this in a second, the digital media, by and large, were being measured by channel-specific metrics. For example, retweets or likes or something like that, which were very difficult, at least these companies, these managers, found them very difficult to compare crosswise with their other media. So essentially, they were looking at each of these media in a somewhat different framework. One of the challenges, I think, for everyone in this room, probably. Here is, again, the data on what I just told you. For example, for the social network accounts, almost half of them were measured with channel-specific metrics. Mobile was about 27% were being measured with channel-specific metrics. Compare that to traditional media, direct mail, for example, only 23% were channel-specific, that is to direct mail, meaning the other 70+% were being measured by things like brand awareness and attitude change and so forth. And again, all of those have been developed so apparently people feel more confident in comparing those across media. It's the 20, oops, there's the 23%. ROI. Well, I'm sorry, one other thing before I get to ROI. 77% of marketers report, again, getting them work together, all of these different channels of communication is still a major goal. So still a lot of work for everyone in this room to be involved in. In fact, about half of them said they were even going so far as to reorganize their entire marketing department to try to make this happen. Again, all of these other numbers I'm giving you are in the study itself. Finally, ROI. Let's get to ROI, which is a favorite subject of mine. In terms of ROI, 70% of managers felt the heat, felt that, in fact, marketing, branding, advertising, all forms of marketing are under greater pressure than ever before. And I think, again, all of us have seen that and know about that. On the other hand, 40% of them felt it was important for them to understand financial metrics and the impact financially of whatever they did. In fact, some of you may have recalled seeing some of the results of this study in Ad Age. It was a headline article in Ad Age a couple months ago. It said essentially, marketers want ROI but don't know how to get it. And again, that was a report of this entire study. 7%, we found, are not using any metric to make their marketing decisions. Again, I'm not quite sure where they are. Maybe they're making up their resumes now. I don't know. But 7% are not using any metrics whatsoever. On the other hand, equally scary to me, 22% of the managers in our survey responded, the only thing we use is brand awareness. What's wrong with that? Well, again, I hope everyone in this room knows that brand awareness is a lagging indicator of the impact of your marketing and branding. It's the last thing you lose. TWA, just before they went out of business, had extraordinarily high brand awareness, and what people were saying was, we know you, we don't like you. So again, the point is that when you're doing any kind of a measure, you need to have the whole picture. Some of the kinds of things our prior speakers were talking about, you need to have the whole picture. And for example, brand awareness, any of you who are managing programs or any of you who have clients managing programs, get them away from brand awareness as this whole measure as quickly as you can, because they said it's the last thing that goes. It's the last thing you lose. What do you need? You need some linkage of brand awareness to what the company is about. In other words, some attribute, some quality, some characteristic. That works. But just brand name awareness, trust me, I've seen a lot of studies, does not work by itself. And it's simple, easy to understand, but again, does not work, at least according to all the empirical studies I've ever seen. Are they satisfied? This was the most startling figure I found in this study when we were looking at the analysis. Over half of them were happy with their ability to measure ROI. And all the studies I've done, I've worked with the ANA, I've worked with the Conference Board on studies, typically we get something more like 15, 25% are satisfied. By the way, that doesn't mean they have measures that work. That means you're satisfied. What we found later in this study, and this sort of mitigates this 55% you're looking at, is that a lot of people in our study didn't know what marketing ROI is. Among other things, they didn't think, many of them, that it had anything to do with financial impact. It was involved with things like reach and frequency and things of that sort. So one of the reasons why I think we're getting 55% is this is the ignorantly happy, in the sense that we're happy, but we're not quite sure why we're happy about this, because we don't really have ROI, but that was just my side comment. In terms of using marketing ROI, yeah, good news on that. 57% claim to use some form of ROI in their budget decision. As I said, the not so good news is what are they actually thinking of when they're using ROI? We found, for example, that in a lot of cases people were in fact still using, in fact almost 70% were using historical spending levels to set their budget, at least in part. And I guess that's okay if you live in a world that never changes, but one of the reasons we're here is that we're in a very much changing world. In any case, 70% were still using essentially last year's budget figures as a basis to come up with this year's budget figures. Once again, opportunities for many people in this room. 30% were saying we're just using the gut instincts, and that probably includes that 7% who are using any metrics at all. Finally, looking at what they thought ROI was, almost 40% did not mention financial outcomes when we asked them directly, what is marketing ROI? Again, what kind of answers do we get? Reach and frequency I mentioned. Good question, someone wrote, which I appreciated. You always like to get feedback on your surveys, right? Good question, I always appreciate that. And make the boss happy was another definition of marketing ROI. So you know, choose what you like there, but in any case, almost 40% did not connect ROI to finance. Return on investment, it seems like there's a lot of dollars in there somewhere, and somehow someone should have perhaps thought about that, I would have thought. So how do you get there? How do you get ROI measured in your organization? Well, actually we came out with some very strong findings on that, which are not really surprising, but in a way are reaffirming. To do it, incentives. You get what you pay for. And in fact, my colleague and I, Dave Rogers, we're now in the midst of going through these data again, using a lot of multivariate techniques, regression obviously, but also cluster and factor analysis and several other things to try to drill deeper or drill more deeply into these data. And some of the things we're finding when we do regressions, analysis, for example, of satisfaction with ROI versus everything but the kitchen sink, very clearly the most stable variables that are coming in are the incentives. I'll tell you what the other one is, it's how long you've been doing it. Nothing surprising there, but also things that are very pragmatic and are doable. What kinds of incentives? Incentives for your employees in terms of making sure it's in their performance reports. The KPIs include ROI. Also your vendors, making it sure it's clear to them that their KPIs include ROI. And again, we are finding this everywhere, both in the crosstabs but also in the regression. This is one of the most powerful, significant variables we've got. And by the way, just to give you an idea on the crosstab, for example, those that compensate employees, 68% were happy with their ROI measurement abilities versus those who don't, 16% only were happy. So again, a huge swing there on the incentive side. Finally, the last thing here, as I said, it takes time. One of the studies I did with the conference board on ROI showed that half of the companies that were dissatisfied and reported no progress on ROI had no people working on it. We usually call that a correlation in statistics. So if you were to make that graph, I think it's pretty clear to you. No people, not satisfied. People, satisfied. You know, 2-point determines a line, but still it was pretty powerful. So again, we found that the longer you're doing it, and by the way, this was not meetings, it was not emails, it was not talking about it, it was having someone spending time on it. And again, that's the point. It's getting traction, getting someone engaged. You all know, you all work with data. The first time through, I feel myself very lucky if I get something good. It takes a while to get something good. It takes a time to work on it. We found that very clearly. So finally, just to sum up, how would we summarize all this? I don't think there's anything here that any of you hopefully would take a great offense to. Obviously set the objectives and then design the metrics to measure those objectives. We didn't know, but we felt that a lot of people answering our survey forms were buying data that were not fitting exactly what they had to do. And again, there's no reason they couldn't have gotten those data, but in fact, it didn't seem like the data were fitting what they needed to understand. Gather the right data for those metrics, communicate to everybody, this includes the incentives, and then finally evaluate and reward employees on what you're doing. What do you get for this? Among other things, we found people satisfied were about 3 or 4 times more likely to be able to answer the question, if your budget was cut 10% next year, what would happen? People not satisfied had trouble answering that question. We also found that people were satisfied with their ROI measures, had measures that were 4 times more likely to be accepted by the finance department. Not unimportant. So again, thank you very much. Happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Questions for Don?
Incidentally, I'll be here till late afternoon tomorrow, but you have to budget about 3 hours if you're going to talk to me, but I'll be
Well, and on that note, we will make sure that a copy of our report is combined with the slides when you get a copy of the slides. Also, if you go to the Green Book blog, greenbookblog.org, there is a link there to download the BRITE study. Anyway, questions, please.
Question?
Don, my question's around, I think you talked a lot about organizations that, I'm over here.
Oh, sorry, thanks.
There we go. Organizations that measure ROI and are very confident with it versus organizations that maybe are not quite there. Have you looked at perceptions of success in market or actual reality? What is the real success in market of those organizations and how does that differ?
No, but that's a very good question. I'm going to keep that in mind. But there will certainly be other waves of this afterwards. We did have a lot more detail, I should say, not answering your question, but we did have a lot more detail by media, by channel, including mobile, that we're in the process of going through now. But let me just get back up a little bit. We did have some questions that dealt with, are you comfortable with the results and so on, and we're trying to use those now in the multivariate techniques. But I don't have any answers for you right now.
Would love to see that.
All right, yeah, thank you very much. Let me just email me, and I'll let you know when we have a new. We'll probably have some new results in about 6 weeks, I'm hoping, and also Green Book will have them available as well.
Thank you. Done.
Yeah, I'm a retiree from one of the Fortune 10 companies, and we always measured ROI, but there's always these. It's so subjective. For example, in our company, the marketing people felt whatever their decisions were on selling a product or on a product, that was the only thing that went into the existence. They did not feel that a sales force really affected the products. So immediately when we started measuring, you got into whether sales really did it. I mean, if you have a good product and a lousy sales force, or a good sales force and a lousy product. It's very, very hard to measure, and it's extremely subjective, and I don't really think it's measurable, personally.
Well, just as an aside, this is my cue to mention my book. I will pay you later. I really appreciate that. No, I have a book called Value Above Cost that was published by Wharton, but it really actually deals with different ways people have tried. I'll agree with you that from the outset it looks kind of difficult, but in fact, again, I don't want to get into it up here, but I can provide you measures that give you an over 90% R-squared for predicting next year's contribution. And, but again, you don't make money selling books. You make it with the movie rights, so you might want to wait for the movie to come out. It's value above cost, though. Thank you. Anybody else?
Oh, wait for the movie.
Hello.
Brad Pitt plays me, of course. You probably noticed that right away. Anyway, anybody else?
I have a question regarding, I know in our organization, marketing often asks the research group, what's the ROI on market research or consumer insight spending itself? Do you have any thoughts on how to answer that?
Yeah, I do actually. Let me, again, without going into this too long, because I wasn't fully responsive to your question before, and I apologize for that. But again, I think the way to look at ROI is not to look at intermediate variables, which is, I think, where you get into a lot of the politics, as you mentioned, with sales and marketing and so on. I mean, I do want to try to answer your question. I think you have to look a little bit further into the purchase cycle, and I mean far beyond Net Promoter Score. I don't think that does it either, personally. I'm talking about things like perceived value, which is willingness to pay. I find that, again, gives me 90%, if you will, prediction power for revenue next year. So getting back to your question, to the extent marketing research improves estimates of numbers like that, metrics like that, you can actually, I can't do it up here, but you can actually make that connection between, if you have this information, then in fact this allows you to make better decisions. I mean, we can do that. It's not a one-line proof, but it's, you know, it's something we can do. And we could also talk it through, saying the better information on those particular metrics, the more accurate, the better our decisions will be over time. We could demonstrate that. Is that it?
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.